As a child, you used to create things with absolutely no reason, no ulterior motive or a purpose behind the creation. There were things like drawings which nobody asked for, but people appreciated because it was your talent. There were whole worlds and stories built in your mind that would disappear if you just forgot about it, and you could feel yourself fully immersed in one for a whole afternoon. And it never really crossed your mind to wonder or think about the fact that it doesn't have a reason or question what it was for. It was not a skill that you were building as a child. It was not content that you were consuming. It was simply creation, something that you made because that was just the fun thing or the obvious thing to do with your day. You don't really do that anymore. And not even directly you, but most of people, most adults, most working class citizens, they don't do these things anymore. And at some point they started labeling that as maturity. They started thinking it was something that only children could fall under, or something that we shouldn't do as adults because we have bigger problems or more stress, right? I think that is the place where everything quietly starts to go downhill, because what happens is you throw out the wrong thing, the wrong label and the wrong ideas, and then congratulated yourself for that maturity. The immaturity, sure, that is a horrible thing to have. Well, maybe not horrible, but it's not a great thing. It's not a good look. You can lose that. You can lose the tantrums. You can lose the everything resolves around me complex, or the not being able to sit with anything hard, mindset that a lot of children have. That part of your childhood was pretty much never worth keeping in the first place, which is why you never really developed upon it. But the childlike thing, the childlike nature, is something completely different to immaturity, and it got swept under the same exact broom that immaturity did. Think about the wondering, the just letting your mind go for a few hours and thinking and visualizing, the being absorbed in something with no thought of the return from that something. The idea of losing yourself entirely while feeling quite proud of how you are growing as a person, feeling happy about the things that you create day to day. You can actively lose the talent, or just the human skill, the childlike skill of that mind wandering, while still feeling pretty happy with your life, and you never notice the swap that comes, which is, in my opinion, the most dangerous part about this whole swap between childlike nature and immaturity, or maturity, if you want to call it maturity. Now, Nietzsche, one of the most mentioned philosophers on this channel, has this thing near the start of his Zarathustra. I always pronounce it wrong, but I think it's along the lines of Zarathustra. It's about 3 stages that your spirit goes through. First is the camel. It kneels down to take the weight, and it carries almost everything that it's told it should carry. Told by the people around it, told by society, told by anything, told by nature. Then comes the lion, who fights everything, fights all of it, and he wins his freedom by saying no, instead of submitting to the things that the people around the lion wants. And most people who ever break out of anything, any stage, stop right there at that lion, at the no, at the satisfaction with themselves. They stop at the rebellion and think that is the top of the mountain. However, Friedrich Nietzsche also introduced a 3rd stage past the lion. It is the child, the one who gets to say yes again, the one who has the right to say yes to what it wants to. Not the yes of never having question, but instead the yes on the far side of all of the fighting. It is a new innocence, a new freedom of the mind, in a sense. It's that childlike freedom of not caring and saying yes to what it wants to exist in. Now, Nietzsche calls this the sacred yes, and a wheel rolling out of its own center. And in a way, he means that the highest thing that you become is not the rebel who broke free, but instead the child who loves to play and says yes to what it satisfies itself with. And that turns the whole thing over, in my opinion. Because the seriousness that you live inside right now, the composure and the maturity, or the way that you can't do a single thing without any reason as to why you are doing it, or any motive as to why you are doing it, you probably clocked that as some sort of finish line for your mind, when it was only actually ever the camel. you were still stuck on the first stage, and most people will remain on that first stage for the rest of their life. That stage is known as the load-bearing stage for a reason. You are carrying what you have been handed and then calling it being an adult or being someone who, deals with their hardships. Now, beyond Nietzsche, we have the Zhuangzi, which is a Taoist text, and it goes at it from a pretty polar side from Friedrich Nietzsche. Like I said, it's a Taoist excerpt or a text from, I guess, their ideology. And it's older than most things. It's older than a lot of what you see nowadays. And China honestly has such a vast history. But it's also full of people who are useless in the best possible way. There's a tree so gnarled and so knotted that no carpenter would ever touch it or want to use it as a tree or as wood that could build something. And everyone calls that tree worthless. And that is exactly why that tree lives to be enormous and ancient, while all the useful, straight-edged or straight-grained and perfectly aligned trees get cut down young and don't get the chance to grow. The book continues to circle this ideology of that gnarled tree, this purposeless thing, this thing that nobody wants to use or nobody wants to have to deal with, something that isn't actually for anything, hasn't been labeled to be useful for any case. That is the very thing that gets to live the longest. Zhuangzi wanders around. He has a laugh at all of the serious men measuring their lives and dreams he's a butterfly, waking up unsure of the fact that, do I go this way today, or does the world go this way, or does the universe travel that way, or which way round does my life go? And as confusing as that sounds, that is the beauty of it. That is that childlike nature. None of the Zhuangzi is trying to actually get anywhere. I feel like I keep mispronouncing it, but I'm going to deal with it anyway. None of it is actually trying to get anywhere. None of it is trying to prove a point. That is the whole teaching behind that excerpt, right? It is not trying to get anywhere, and that is what makes it so mystical and so profound. And I feel this with a lot of recent films, or a lot of certain films, maybe not so much recent, but a lot of older films, a lot of TV shows, a lot of records, especially music or art, genuine, beautiful pieces of art. And there's a kind of thing that could only have come from someone who keeps the child alive in them somehow. The best actors are the ones who you yourself can feel the emotion from, right? And the only way they can express that emotion successfully is through a creative and a passionate form of art. And that is derived from that childlike nature, as strange as it sounds. It's the individual who keeps the child alive which succeeds the most in any sort of creative art form. And you can honestly feel it in the second it starts, in any sort of music, in any sort of painting, in anything. It just feels unguarded. It feels as it exists. It's not asking to be respected. It's not asking for you to see it as beautiful, but instead it simply plays. It simply exists. It's simply in your vision. But then there is also the other kind. There's the kind which is, I guess, formulated by competence, made by people who know precisely and exactly what they're doing and lost the thing so many years ago. And it's quite polished, it's quite accomplished, but nobody is actually home to reap the rewards, or I guess reap the metrics. And a go-to example of this could be Mr. Beast, right? He's, honestly, you can't deny his genius. He's incredible at what he does, but it feels quite soulless in a sense. His videos feel edited. His videos feel like nothing. However, when you watch a flowing channel, someone who actually wants to exist. Recently, I was watching this traveling guy. I forget his name. He was traveling in Nepal, and his content just felt like it resonated simply due to the fact that he existed in the world instead of making the world exist around him. Half the time, the soulless channel or the soulless individual or art form is more skillful, and it's undeniable. However, the gap is whether or not the child was still in the room or in their mind while the content or while the art form was being made. Because without that childlike nature, the art form only exists as a metric as opposed to beautiful. It doesn't really exist in nature's eyes, but instead in the eyes of the capitalist, right? Getting back to that childlike form, feels ridiculous at first. Obviously, even making this video feels ridiculous, because who would want to be like a child? It feels embarrassing in a way. You've spent so many years, decades of your life training yourself to need a justification for your own time, and the childlike thing hands you no justification. It hands you no reason. It simply hands you the task at hand. In my opinion, that is the point of it. That is the point I've been trying to make this whole video. It refuses to be for anything. It refuses to exist for a purpose, and instead just exists because it exists. So you make the thing that nobody actually wanted. Maybe you yourself didn't even want it. It was just that moment of your mind that wanted it. You follow the curiosity in your mind that leads you nowhere. The rabbit hole, which leaves you with no valuable information, but leaves you with a feeling of resolution. And you allow the life you live to sometimes be bad, and don't turn it into a project with a name. That is it. That is doing that every single day, doing one of those things, doing a multitude of things. Some things I didn't name, some things I named earlier. Doing any of those is how you bring back that childlike nature from yourself. And it's not going to feel natural. That is what it costs to have performed adulthood this long throughout your life. The thing that used to be your resting state has now chosen on purpose to be awkward and against everything that you've built or you stand for. However, it's still in there. Regardless of the fact if you believe it or don't believe it, it is still inside of you somewhere. We are creative in almost everything we do every single day. Sometimes we choose to drive this way. Sometimes we choose to walk. Sometimes we choose to do this that way. That is a creative choice. That is creative agency. The child never actually left your mind. Instead, it just goes under all the weight of the camel bearing everything on his back, and the fighting of the long habit that you've built over your entire life of needing everything to mean something. So eventually, once you start practicing, you will get it back in flashes. You will get it back lost in something, but you can feel it under the weight, right? You feel it masking your life, as if something has just started inhibiting the mind. Not inhibiting, but instead breaking free of the chains that you imposed upon yourself. And eventually, you do remember that this life was always going to be the most alive that you ever will be the whole time, because you exist every single day. You were yourself, or you are most yourself, before you learn to be serious about being yourself.